Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Catholicos, Catholics, Christians, all who seek the truth. So today it's about Cardinal Burke. And what does he think of the validity of the pontificate of Francis, whether Francis is truly Pope or not? To cut it short, he doesn't really say exactly what he thinks, but let's go through it. So this, I actually saw the video before LifeSite there posted it. So here it says, Cardinal Burke responds to questions about the validity of Pope Francis's election. And they link, you can see the video there, it's a link to Patrick Coffin's podcast, his YouTube channel. And I did watch the whole video, and it starts from 19 minutes and 22 seconds. I place a link for the video so you can watch the whole thing. It's pretty good. And then we will analyze some of exactly what he said and what he didn't say, and what should have been asked but was not asked. So as I say, usually at the end of the videos, do kind of look at this channel, subscribe, like the video if you like it. If you hate it, just ignore it. Anyways, before we start, actually, I want to start again. We have to always maintain the faith. There's only one Church of Christ, one Bride of Christ, one Kingdom of Christ. There are no two or three or four. Okay? And it is founded upon the rock, Simon Bar-Jonah, Simon Peter. And he is the Bishop of Rome. He is the Supreme Pontiff. He is the Vicar of Christ. And we have to be united with the Vicar of Christ, the true Vicar of Christ. And anyways, this is actually, I showed it previously in a different type of video. It's from a Coptic Orthodox, ancient Coptic Orthodox church. And you can see here St. Peter is the only one with keys. All the other apostles just have crosses or something. And so even the Coptic Orthodox, who are not in communion with the Catholic Church, again, you can see here, St. Peter with the keys. He's the only one with the keys. All the others don't have keys. Okay, so this is from a very historical ancient church, Haret Zuela. So just to kind of a little thing. So we always have to know that there is, from the most ancient times, Peter has the keys of the kingdom of heaven. He is the one which Jesus founded the church upon. So anyways, let's go ahead. So the state of the Catholic Church. I'll play a couple of clips because I'm not sure if the whole thing is like 6 minutes exactly almost. So the whole video is like an hour, but this portion of the discussion about 6 minutes. I will not play you the 6 minutes. He might not like it, so I'll link to his video. You can watch the whole thing over there. So I'll just start off the beginning of it, and then I will go a transcript. I wrote exactly what he said. So here we go. Hopefully
letters
you can listen.
And Catholics feel dizzy, Cardinal Burke. I speak to them all the time when I'm on the road, and I hear from them when they give feedback from my show. And some Catholics are wondering if it's permissible to investigate at least whether or not the 1995...
But I will link to this video. Here's the exact transcript of what Cardinal Burke says. So Patrick Coffin is telling him, look, Cardinal Burke, I'm touring, I'm going all over the place, and a lot of Catholics come to me, and I speak to, so here he says, I speak to them all the time on the road, and I hear from them, hear from them when they give me feedback from my whatever. And some Catholics are wondering, so they're from his tours, and some Catholics are wondering if it is permissible. Is it permissible? Is it okay to investigate at least whether or not the 1995, actually it's 1996, Apostolic Constitution Universi Dominici Gregis by Saint John Paul II, which laid down the norms for future papal conclaves, whether these rules were violated, and whether or not the whole election of Pope Francis might be invalid. So this is the question people are asking Patrick Coffin. So he's asking Cardinal Burke, is there any foundation to that speculation? So, of course, the speculation's been since 2013, 2014 has been going on actually. And Antonio Socci here has a book just in Italian. Unfortunately, I hope these guys translate this book into English. It's called Nonni Francesco. It's not Francis. And he wrote this, I believe, in 2014. And his idea was, from what I've gathered from several years ago, reading about it, is that there was an extra ballot, like the rules of the conclave, according to Pope John Paul II. There was supposed to be 4 ballots, say, per day. And if nobody's elected, then the next day you do 4. So I believe, I can't remember 4 or 5, it depends, it's one of these numbers. So suppose it's 4. So what happens is in one of the days, on the last day, so there were 4 ballots, and then they did a 5th in contravention of the laws of the Constitution, which would render the whole vote null. So you cannot be elected on a 5th ballot, which was not allowed in the Constitution to elect a pope. So I think this was the whole gist of Nonni Francesco of Antonio Socci. And there's another bishop, René Gracida, formerly of Corpus Christi, Texas, and this is his webpage, and he holds that the election of Francis, if not completely void, it is invalid, probably is illicit. In any case, again, this is his, and he's a solid bishop, and this is his idea that, again, there were violations to this constitution of papal election, and therefore the election is invalid. Who knows? But what does first of all, I actually want you to notice what Cardinal Burke is saying. He doesn't jump down the throat of Patrick Coffin and tells him, oh, these people are schismatics. These people don't know what they're talking about. These people are idiots. No, Pope Francis is the Pope, and that's it. End of the question. No discussions. Pope Francis, Benedict resigned validly, and this is the Pope. He's the Pope, and there is no other, and that's it. End of the question. End of discussion. He didn't say any of that. Actually, he sounded very, very understanding. Let's read the Cardinal Burke's answer. So here he says, the only grounds that I think could be adduced for calling into question the validity of the election, calling into question the validity of the election, would be if the electors were organized in a campaign beforehand, which is strictly forbidden. That is, but that's very difficult to demonstrate. And there's people talk about this extra ballot, which I just mentioned, that was taken. So there's no dispute that this extra ballot was indeed taken. So if this extra ballot was taken and Jorge was elected based upon this extra ballot, which was illegal according to the Universi Dominici Gregis of John Paul II, which for the papal elections, would this not obviously invalidate at least this vote? So the voting still has to continue? I don't know. Anyways, and so forth. I do not see how. And notice these key words. Cardinal Burke is saying, I studied that question, which means Cardinal Burke himself seems to think there is a small possibility Francis isn't Pope. So he says, I studied that question. And I don't see there that it was in any way call into question the validity of the election. So he's talking about the extra ballot. But again, if the extra ballot is illegal and it would nullify the vote, I don't know. But again, but the only thing he says, if their electors were organized in a campaign beforehand. Well, actually Cardinal Burke himself admits, he says, there are declarations that were made by the late Cardinal Gottfried Niels, the Archbishop of Brussels and Mechelen, who talks about the Sankt Gallen group. Actually, he calls it the Sankt Gallen Mafia, and how they were meeting first local, basically first to oppose Pope John Paul II, and continually, I think that they already stopped, but continued to be very opposed to Pope Benedict XVI. And that's actually some of the reasons people say maybe Benedict was pushed out of the pontificate because actually Cardinal Martini was one of the St. Gallen group, St. Gallen Mafia, and apparently he threatened Benedict, told him, look, if you can't do this, you have to resign. And there are many other events which happened, credit card machines stopped working and all kinds of things, and a lot of that is detailed in Infiltration by Taylor Marshall. I have a 2-video review of this book, Infiltration, so you can go over it. So that they were very opposed to Benedict. So the 16th, the autobiographer of the, again, that's number one Cardinal, what's his name? Godfrey Daniels. And actually here, I have a little video of him. Where is it? Actually, your Church Milton has St. Gallen Mafia Cardinal dies, and they talk about Cardinal Daniels, Godfrey Daniels. So on August 2015, papal advisor Austin Ivory mentioned the St. Gallen Mafia in his biography of the great reformer Francis and the making of a radical pope. Ivory claimed, it's not a claim because Daniels himself mentions it, the St. Gallen group was instrumental in the election in Pope Francis' election to the papacy. And then in September 2015, now deceased Cardinal Daniels confirmed the existence of the cabal. He said in an interview on a video, the St. Gallen group is a sort of a posh name, but in reality, we said of ourselves, so they called themselves, and of that group, the Mafia. So they call themselves the Mafia. They're gangsters. They're gangsters who hated John Paul II, who hated Benedict XVI, and who seek to put in their own man according to their own desires. It appears St. Gallen group formed in the late 90s to counter John Paul II and then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. This type of organized campaign for papal election during conclave is technically forbidden. So, and Pope John Paul II decreed an automatic excommunication for anybody involved in such a campaign. But apparently, even an excommunicated cardinal can still elect. It would not invalidate the election, according to Pope Pius XII. Where is it here? Here we go. So this one, can an excommunicated cardinal be elected pope? But Pope Pius XII apparently says, yeah, that's okay. The excommunications are lifted only during the election and then reimposed. But this is for violations of mere discipline, not for doctrine. A heretic cannot be pope, basically, or if he's a pope, he will fall from the papacy. Yeah, Antonio Hasochi has his Nonni Francisco, Bishop Gracida, and this is actually a video, and this has the English translation of, maybe I'll put a link as well to this, of Cardinal Daniels telling everybody that, yes, they had a mafia, and they sought to elect Jorge
De groep van St. Gallen, dat is een
The
soort
good thing
naam
with this, it actually has
die
these
deftig is.
translations.
Maar eigenlijk zeiden wij van onszelf en van die
In
groep
the video
de
itself, they
maffia.
say that this St. Gallen group was
Kardinaal
instrumental
Daniels praat
in
voor het eerst over de geheime groep van
Jorge.
kerkleiders waar hij toe behoorde. Hij doet dat in de
So I'll place a link for it. But let's continue. We'll see what Cardinal Burke had to say. And then he says here, they continue to be very opposed to Benedict XVI. The autobiographer of Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor talks about this. So, and there are indications, but I think if it could be demonstrated that these persons engaged in an active, engaged in an active campaign, first to undermine Pope Benedict, and then at the same time engineer the election of someone who would be different, that could be an argument for the invalidity of the election. I don't know. I don't think that I am I am, and then the facts, and they have to be facts demonstrable, demonstrable facts to prove that. And that all I can say about that. And actually, Cardinal Murphy, Cardinal O'Connor. So let's close this video here. We actually that we'll get to this in a second. Here, Cardinal Life and Legacy of Cormac Cardinal Murphy O'Connor, and in the article, it does here has whatever all the stuff he did. Not too good sometimes. Conclave lobbyist. So he is following Cardinal Bergoglio to the see, following the election of Cardinal Bergoglio to the See of Peter, Cardinal Murphy O'Connor and several other well-known cardinals made headlines with revelations. They were part of the secretive St. Gallen club of cardinals and bishops. And actually, Cardinal Daniel says there were so many bishops and cardinals. He doesn't even mention how many, who met regularly between 96 and 2006 to plan how they could get a more reform-minded candidate, such as Bergoglio, elected Pope. So there's clearly, they were been hatching this plot for quite a while. Cardinal Casper and Carlo Martini were as well members. So apparently this group was disbanded after the election of Benedict, but then reformed again to help elect Jorge. Author Austin Ivory, and he's always on Twitter defending Pope Francis on every left, right, and center. He's a very modernist, very liberal Catholic. There's no such thing, actually. And former editor Catherine Pepinster have both of them, Austin Ivory and Catherine, detailed the lobbying efforts of Cardinal Murphy, Cardinal O'Connor in the days leading up to the conclave, and I did a full review on just the portion of the Cardinal Murphy O'Connor and what he did. I have a video review on the keys and the kingdom. So the cardinal toured diners of Commonwealth and North American cardinals ahead of conclave to win support for Bergoglio. Actually, they were invited to the British embassy, to the British ambassador's office by the official government of England, and lobbied to vote for, apparently, for Jorge Bergoglio. On the night Pope Francis greeted the enthusiastic crowds gathered in the Piazza San Pietro. Cardinal Daniels, as also a member of the St. Gallen Club, could be seen standing quietly next to the newly elected Pope. So, how much proof do you really need? Again, that's another article from the Telegraph, revealed how British cardinal fixed Vatican conclave for his friend Pope Francis. Isn't this supposed to be illegal? Is this not supposed to be not allowed? And actually in the book, there's the Australian ambassador talks about that this is the ultimate Pope maker. We've seen a non-voting cardinal who could orchestrate the election of Jorge Bergoglio. Anyways, and the canniness meant he ensured his friend was elected Pope Francis, a pope who has made a huge impact on the Catholic Church and world. There have been kingmakers in history. Cormac Murphy O'Connor turned out to be a pope maker. Shortly after his election, Pope Francis was overheard telling Murphy O'Connor, "Tuo I colpevole," translated, "You're to blame." So even Pope Francis knew who got him elected. So on this website from Rome, and it says basically, I'm not going to go through it, 30 cardinals are implicated in the vote canvassing scandal. So 30 cardinals, which could sway an election very easily. So now let's continue with what I'll play a bit of this. I'm not sure if you can hear anything, but give me a second here.
Apostolic Constitution, University Dominici Gregis by St. John Paul II. who laid down norms for future papal conclaves, whether those rules.
All right, that's enough because I can't tell if you can hear or you can't. So let's continue with what he said here. All right. So Patrick Coffin asks, I remember when Austin Ivory's book, The Great Reformer, Francis and the Making of a Radical Pope, came out. As soon as it was published, the late Cormac Murphy O'Connor said that there was a chapter there that had to be excised because it didn't happen, and that the chapter had to do with how lavish dinners and schmoozing and what looks like politicking, which was also alluded to by Theodore, the rapist Cardinal McCarrick, in his speech in 2015 at Villanova. So this is what is leading people to say, well, maybe these rules that were laid down by John Paul II were in fact violated, and I see the problem. It's how to prove it, and prove it with a fact that's demonstrable and not speculation, because it's a conversation. So he stops there. And actually I have you can see here, if you can just search it, with Cardinal McCarrick, his speech at Villanova, and he says here, I'll play just a teeny bit. I don't know if can you hear anything. But.
Do it, you know. I said, what could he do? He said he could reform the church. He gave him 5 years, he could put us back on top.
Anyways, so basically he says he was approached with this Italian gentleman, a very influential person, which we don't know. He's not mentioned who it is. And basically, apparently, he was telling him, Jorge Bergoglio, he can make it. There's talk about him. You should go and talk him up to accept the nomination if he gets chosen. So apparently there was lobbying happening in the Vatican, in Rome, in contravention of the Constitution for the election of a pope issued by Pope John Paul II. So let's continue with the interview here. So Cardinal Burke jumps in and says, it's certainly there are indications. So there he's not denying it, as you mentioned. There are indications, but then from that we had to, again, the words seem weird because it's a conversation, so it's not an essay. So, but then we have to establish concrete proofs of this. So basically you have to establish concrete proofs. So speculation, indications, which seems what's happened, but we still need concrete proof. The speech at Villanova of Theodore McCarrick certainly creates a great suspicion, but I don't know if there are people who could be able to demonstrate this or not. Well, we had Daniels himself brags about it. Austin Ivory talks about Cormac Murphy O'Connor. Theodore McCarrick talks about it, and apparently other bishops did. So Patrick Coffin continues. I've spoken with Bishop René Henry Gracida, Bishop Emeritus of Corpus Christi, about this. He's written an open letter to cardinals saying only an imperfect synod could be called to resolve this because canon lawyers, everybody has an opinion. Opinions are very common. What just linger on this? Let's just linger on this just for a moment. And then Antonio Socci, now here's the mention of Antonio Socci, has written a book which speculates that perhaps the abdication of Pope, now emeritus Benedict XVI, was canonically irregular, and therefore he's still the Pope. I'm sure you've seen this speculation. Cardinal Burke interjects and says, yes, published. What are your thoughts about that possibility? Now, the book he's mentioning is, here it is, The Secret of Benedict. Is he still Pope? The Italian actually says why he's still Pope, not is he still Pope. But that's the Antonio Socci book. I have a full review of that one as well. And he's not the first one to mention this, actually. There are other people who mentioned the discrepancies, but he kind of actually gathers a lot of the information. Overall, it's a very good book. So Again, notice Cardinal Burke doesn't say, oh, he's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. All these people who talk about Benedict maybe being Pope are just insane. They're schismatics. They're not Catholic. None of that stuff. What does he say? First of all, I know Antonio Socci. He's an outstanding man. And I would even say a saintly man. I know him personally. And I know that his thesis with regard to the claim that Pope Benedict XVI is continuing to be the spiritual pope, even though he ceded the governance of the church to someone else. In other words, this division of the papacy, this division of the division of the ministry from the office itself. In other words, someone could hold the office and someone else actually carrying out the ministry. That simply won't flow. There's only one pope, and the pope has to govern the church. He can't simply say that I want to be pope, but I'll have someone else to govern the church. So then that won't hold water. So yes, we agree with Cardinal Burke. You cannot divide the papal office between active and passive, between ministry and office, between governance and non-governance. You cannot split the papal office. It is one and singular. So let's continue and see what Cardinal Burke says, because let's see. There is a peculiar discourse that Pope Benedict XVI gave. He at least recognizes that it is peculiar. Actually, it is not peculiar. It is peculiar. It's kind of weird, but it shows you exactly what Benedict himself was thinking and what did he think. Another thing actually about the resignation of Benedict, there is online you find people, canonists and linguists, Latinists, talking about the errors, the linguistic Latin errors in the renunciation of Benedict XVI. And according to apparently canon law, Benedict would not make errors in Latin. He would not, unless on purpose. So and accordingly, any papal decrees, official decrees with Latin errors are null and void. Again, that's another argument which I haven't really examined. Anyways, here we go. There is a peculiar discourse that Pope Benedict XVI gave at his last Wednesday audience, in which he seems to suggest this. So he admits this is exactly what Pope Benedict is suggesting, that, he's just the spiritual pope and he's leaving the governance. And also there was a speech by his private secretary, Archbishop Georg Gonswein, who is still the secretary of Benedict and the head of the papal household of Francis, at the Gregorian University, that would suggest the same thing. So who are we to believe? The authors of the declaration, like Pope Benedict and his personal secretary, or our own understanding? They are the ones who are saying it. But then afterwards, the Pope has strenuously denied. So I don't know if he means the Pope, or is it Georg Gonswein? I think it's Gonswein who said it. Anyways, has denied. Pope Benedict XVI strenuously denied that he thinks that he's still the Pope. Well, first of all, where is exactly that? And of course, he cannot say I'm not the Pope, since he calls himself Pope, Pope emeritus, Pope, and he still calls himself Holiness, and he gives his papal blessing, Apostolic blessing. So, anyways, and when Francis gets cardinals elected, they go and visit Pope Benedict, and they kneel in front of him and kiss his ring, kiss his hand, and receive his blessing and leave. Every time Francis gets new cardinals elected, he takes them to Benedict to greet him and pay their respects. Why? Isn't Francis the Pope? Why are they even going to Benedict? They can go as a private visit. They don't have to go as a group of the new cardinals to visit the Pope emeritus. Again, emeritus doesn't exist for a pope. Again, this is not the subject of this video. Anyways, and Cardinal Burke, the whole matter is a bit confused. It's not a bit confused. It's a lot confused. But in criticizing the talk, but in criticizing and talking to Sochi, I won't. But in criticizing and talking to Sochi, I want to say that it merits to read him, and I can't, as much as I respect, he respects him, and if I don't think that this thesis will hold, he doesn't think this thesis will hold. Well, okay, I'm gonna go. Let's see here. Patrick Coffin continues. I'm reading the book now, and I don't know how functionally he is in English. Actually, Patrick, this book was originally written in Italian, and this is an English translation by the publisher. But he does a lot of background research before sitting down. That much is certainly clear. What was not okay? I'll get to what was not asked in a bit. So let's go here, because Cardinal Burke mentioned Pope Francis, Pope Benedict's speech, and Archbishop Gonswine's speech. So we'll do a very quick, because I can spend a lot of time on this. But let's see what Benedict himself said. This is from Wednesday, 27 February 2013, his last general audience. So he says here, when on 19 April, nearly 8 years ago, I accepted the Petrine ministry. Again, you have to pay attention to the words, the Petrine ministry. And then he continues down here. I have taken this step with full awareness of its gravity and even its novelty. So it's not some papal resignation like every other papal resignation in the history of the Church. It is novelty. Actually, even Archbishop Gonswine, we'll get to it, stresses that this has never, ever, ever happened in the Church before. Not Celestine, not anybody else. This is unique. The gravity and even its novelty. Here now, allow me to go back once again to 19 April 2015, which is the day he accepted the Petrine ministry. And as soon as you accept it, you accept the office, and you immediately are the Pope. So he goes once again to the papal. The real gravity of the decision was also due to the fact that from that moment on, from the day he accepted the office of Peter, I was engaged always and forever, always and forever, always and forever by the Lord. Always, anyone who accepts the Petrine ministry no longer has any privacy. He belongs always and completely to everyone, to the whole Church. So he cannot, in his mind, he cannot leave that ministry, the Petrine ministry, because he accepted it always and forever. The always is also a forever. There can no longer be a return to the private sphere. Why? If you resign the papacy, the papal office, you are no longer the Pope. You are Cardinal Ratzinger or Bishop Ratzinger, Bishop Joseph Ratzinger. My decision to resign, now here are the key words. He does not resign the ministry, he doesn't resign the ministry, the Petrine ministry, or the ministry of Peter. He does not resign the Petrine ministry, which he received always and forever on April 19, 2005. No, because anyone who accepts the Petrine ministry no longer has any privacy and is always and forever. My decision to resign the active exercise, not the ministry itself, the active exercise of the ministry does not revoke this. Does not revoke what? Which he just mentioned previously, his acceptance of the Petrine ministry, of the office of Peter. Does not revoke his acceptance, which was always and forever. But his resignation of the active exercise does not revoke his acceptance of the Petrine ministry, of the office of Peter. So he says, I'm Pope, but I'm no longer going to do my active exercise. I can no longer bear, now again, these are key words, I no longer bear the power of office. Not just, he could say, I no longer bear the office. I have given up the office. No, he says, I no longer bear the power of office for the governance of the Church. but I remain in the enclosure of St. Peter. And it talks about St. Benedict, giving us an example of a way of life which is either active or passive. So in his mind, he's a passive pope, because the governance, he gave it to somebody else, to the new successor of the Apostle Peter. You cannot, so this is basically what Benedict said, and his personal secretary, Archbishop Gonswein, the full speech, and that was in 2016. So Benedict said that in 2013. This is 3 years later. And there's here a quote. He's talking about Peter Sewald asking him in his way. So he's asking Benedict, says, "Are you the end of the old or the beginning of the new?" The Pope's answer was brief and sure: "The one and the other." So he's the end of the old, the beginning of the new. The new what? The new form of patrine ministry, of papal office. So here's Archbishop Gonswein. Again, he says, "And the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church continues to have one legitimate pope. But today we live with two living successors of Peter." Two living successors of Peter. How can they be two living successors of Peter? There's only one successor of Peter. There cannot be two successors of Peter. So if one was truly resigned, he is no longer a successor of Peter. There's only one. But apparently now, even though apparently we have a one legitimate pope, whatever that means, but we live with two living successors of Peter. And there can only be one. Like the TV series, there can only be one. Many people even today continue to see this situation as a kind of exceptional, not regular state of the divinely instituted office of Peter. So this is called a state of exception. So this is a state of exception of the divinely instituted office of Peter. So it's a divinely instituted office. So no pope, no matter how saintly or theologically competent he may be, can alter the divinely instituted office of Peter. Nobody. So, for I was present with Benedict XVI at the end of his mandate to remove the fisherman's ring, as is customary after the death of a pope, even though in this case, he was still alive. I was present when, on the other hand, when he decided not to give up the name he had chosen, as Pope Celestine had done when on December 13, 2014, few months after the start of his ministry, he became Pietro dal Marone. Since February 2013, the papal ministry, remember, the papal ministry, since 2013, February, is therefore no longer what it was before. So the divinely instituted office suddenly, after February 2013, is no longer what it was before. So it is and remains the foundation of the Catholic Church, the papal ministry, papal office, and yet it is a foundation which Benedict XVI have profoundly and permanently transformed. Again, he just mentioned this is divinely instituted office, so Benedict XVI cannot profoundly and permanently transform during his pontificate of exception. So it's not an exceptional, it's a pontificate of exception, kind of an odd pontificate. It's out of the normal, out of the ordinary. So again, he talks about here in April 2005, again, a dramatic struggle between the so-called Salt in the Earth Party around Cardinals Lopez Ruini, which supported Ratzinger, and the so-called St. Gallen group. Our little St. Gallen mafia is all over the place. A kind of mafia, which is Cardinal Daniels, Martini, Silvestrini, Murphy, O'Connor. And continues. I know it's a bit longer, but again, this is not meaningless stuff. This is critical. Bergoglio, the author, he's reviewing the book he wrote, observes, however, that after the last encyclical called Caritas in Veritate in December 4th, 2009, a dynamic, innovative papacy with a strong drive from a liturgical, ecumenical, and canonical perspective suddenly appeared to have slowed down, been blocked and bogged down. Here you go, the attack on Benedict from the deep state in the Vatican, if you want to call it that way. That scandal was too small for such a thing, and so much greater was the well-considered step of millennial historical significance, which is Benedict XVI change of the Petrine ministry, of the office, of his resignation but remaining Pope. He says here, Benedict XVI had already thoroughly thought through, from a theological point of view, the possibility of Popes Emeritus in the future. Again, there's plenty of canonists who absolutely deny this possibility. And you cannot build a doctrine on a possibility. You cannot alter an office on a divinely instituted office on a possibility. Benedict XVI, he introduced into the Catholic Church the new institution of Pope Emeritus. The new institution. There is no such thing. He invented it. Stating that his strength was no longer sufficient to properly exercise the Petrine ministry. The key word in the statement is the munus Petrinum. Actually, it's ministerium, not munus, but anyways. Benedict understood and understands his task as participation in such a Petrine ministry. If he's using word munus, he's meaning office. He has left the papal throne, and yet with this step made on February 11, 2013, he has not at all abandoned this ministry. How is this possible? Didn't he just resign? How can he not have abandoned this ministry? Instead, he has complemented with a personal he has complemented the personal office. So he changed the divinely instituted office with a collegial and synodal dimension as a quasi-shared ministry. A quasi-shared ministry. All right, let's see here. Again, the office of Peter is one. It cannot be shared by anybody. So since the election of his successor, and he says there's two living successors previously to St. Peter, March 13, 2013, there are not therefore two popes, but de facto an expanded ministry. So that's why he means by one, there's only one legitimate pope. What is this one legitimate pope? Is the de facto expanded ministry with an active member and contemplative member. And now the mystery of Benedict will be solved. This is why Benedict has not given up his name or his white cassock. This is why. The correct name to which to address him even today is Your Holiness. This is also why he has not retired to a secluded monastery but within the Vatican, as if he had only taken a step to the side. He didn't leave, he didn't back away, he just went, okay, you can come next to me, buddy. Hey, Jorge and me, we're the two popes now. To the side, to make room for his successor at a new stage of the history, a new stage in the history of the papacy. No. Divinely instituted office, just said that. Conswine said it's a divinely instituted office. You cannot have a new history of the papacy and invent a new, change the actual personal office into a collegial office. So he says 35 years later, Benedict, he's talking about history, he has not, and listen to this, again, we're talking about, did he leave the ministry, the governance, did he leave the office, ministerium, munus, all that stuff. 35 years later, Benedict, has not abandoned the office of Peter. See, he abandoned the exercise of the ministry, but he has not abandoned the office of Peter, something which would have been entirely impossible for him. After his irrevocable acceptance of the office in April 2005, and that reminds me again what Benedict himself here on his last general audience himself said, that his acceptance, this was always and forever, does not revoke this. So this, he does not irrevocable. irrevocable, cannot be revoked. His acceptance, which he did this of 2005 of the office in April 2005. If he didn't abandon the office, which was an irrevocable acceptance, then he is still Pope. He cannot, as Cardinal Burke, not govern the church and remain Pope and let the governance to somebody else. He cannot split that. It's impossible. There's only one Pope. If we take Cardinal Burke at his word, then Benedict is still Pope, because he attempted to do that which was impossible, which would render his so-called renunciation null and void. But in the history of the church, it shall remain true that in the year 2013, the famous theologian on the throne of Peter became history's first Pope Emeritus. There was no such thing previously. Since then, his role, allow me to repeat it once again, is entirely different from that, for example, of the Holy Pope Celestine V. To date, in fact, there has never been a step like that taken by Benedict XVI. Also thus entered into the pontificate around, again he mentions, the successors of the Apostle Peter, meaning Francis and Benedict. So this, Gaunswine, Pope Benedict himself. So let's continue here and see what Patrick finish up the review here. We did. Oh, okay. So actually, there's okay, quickly, canon law. The Code of Canon Law, Roman Pontiff, Code 331, the Bishop of the Roman Church, in whom continues the office given by the Lord uniquely, cannot be shared, to Peter. First one is transmitted to his successors. By virtue of the office, he possesses full supreme immediate. Canon 332, number 1. The Roman Pontiff obtains full and supreme power in the Church by his acceptance of legitimate election. So if it is an illegitimate election, then he doesn't accept the office, even though it says, I accept. Sorry, it was illegitimate, so though you're not Pope. And he gains this power from the moment of acceptance. Number 2, if it happens that the Roman Pontiff resigns his office, not the active exercise or the exercise of the office. No, he doesn't resign the exercise of the office, he resigns the office, the munus petrinum. So if the Roman Pontiff resigns the office, it is required for validity that the resignation is made freely and properly manifested, but not that it be accepted by anyone. 333, number 1, by virtue of his office, the Roman Pontiff not only possesses power over the universal church, but also obtains the primacy of ordinary power over all particular churches and groups within. And so that is the law of the church, according to the 1983 Code of Law, which is in effect. Again, resignation, Canon 8188, that's for any ecclesiastical office, which includes the Pope, the papal office. The papal office is not an ordination, it's not an eighth sacrament, it's not some kind of indelible mark. It is an office. So this governs it too. Canon 188, the resignation made out of grave fear. Was there grave fear? There seems to have been a lot of things happening. There was the money getting stopped in the Vatican. There was threats of assassination even. So a resignation made out of grave fear that is inflicted unjustly or out of malice. Substantial error. Now, this is the big one, substantial error. If Benedict wanted to split the papacy, to stop the power of governance, he no longer bears the power of governance for the church. He abandoned the active exercise of the Petrine ministry, but remained in the Petrine ministry. So if he wanted to have a de facto expanded ministry, so this is substantial error. Or simony is invalid by the law itself. So the resignation would be invalid by the law itself. So that is the big question. And finally, on this point, there was actually, before we do that, Monsignor Nicola Books, in a tremendous interview, actually, Unity in the Truth, October 13th, 2018, with Aldo Maria Valli, and he's talking about heresy and heretical popes and what happens and so forth. He says, out of this big long discussion, out of the blue, he says, as you can see, there are many practical, theological, and juridical difficulties to the question of the judgment of the heretical pope. Perhaps, now that's Cardinal Nicola Books, consulted to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, a very good friend of Pope Benedict XVI, an Orthodox man, as all can say, attest. And I say this from a practical point of view. It would be easier to examine and study more accurately the question concerning the juridical validity of Pope Benedict XVI renunciation. That is, whether it was full or partial. In the middle, as some have said, or doubtful, since the idea of a sort of collegiate papacy seems to be decidedly against the Gospels, the evangelical wording, the words of the Gospel. So, this one is by a canonist, a canon law professor from the theological faculty of Famiglia Romana in Lugano, and it was done, I think, in 2013 too. And he examines all the different popes and the legislation from the Middle Ages and the possibility of resignation and so forth. It's a big long study. And I'll just go to the conclusion of it. Here we go. Okay, here we go. The innovative formula of resignation introduced by Benedict XVI. So he's a canon law professor. I believe he was the head of the university. I'm not 100% sure. You can look him up. And he says, so it's an innovative formula. Turning now to the formula used to state the resignation, two data emerge from the Declaratio. In the first place, the lack of any reference to Canon 332, number 2, which is the one I just read you, which governs the resignation from office of the Roman Pontiff. And the second place is a lexical choice different from the norm of Quoniam aliqui of Boniface VIII, which again about 8th, which speaks of resignation from the papacy. Again, Benedict didn't say I'm resigning from the papacy, otherwise he wouldn't call himself pope and wear white. And from the wording of the code, which provides for the renuncio muneri, renunciation of office. None of that. The Declaratio of Benedict XVI, in fact, affirms the renuncio ministerio, the renunciation of ministry. The novelty of Benedict XVI's formula can be grasped in all its magnitude by reconstructing the argumentative joints of the text. And he goes through it, so I'm not going to go do that, but I will go to his conclusion. Conclusion on February 11th, 2013, in full harmony with the tradition of the Church. No, of course not, because the whole article is showing how it was not in harmony with the Church and that it was an absolute innovation. The innovative declaration, he just mentioned it, and doesn't conform to any of the laws of the resignation from papal office. So Benedict XVI declared his renunciation of the Petrine ministry. Concerning the dictate of the canon, however, he declared his renunciation not of the office, but of its administration. A renunciation limited to the active exercise of the munus, the power of governance, as Benedict XVI himself said, constitute the absolute novelty of the resignation of Benedict XVI. So this is what this canon law professor from Lugano, declared in 2013, the resignation of Benedict XVI between history, law, and conscience. So, now, what was not mentioned in the interview with Patrick Coffin? What was not asked was, first of all, again, as I mentioned, there were some apparently grammatical errors which in the resignation, which ought not to have been there, which some say would nullify it, even if it was valid. So what was not asked, though, in Easter 2019, there was a letter issued by a lot of Orthodox, good, solid Catholic clergy, including a very good British theologian. I think it was Dom Alcuin Greed. No, not Alcuin Reid, but Aidan Nichols, Father Aidan Nichols, among many others. In it, they list all the heresies. They basically accuse Pope Francis of committing the crime of heresy. And then they go through the demonstration of the different errors, mainly from Amoris Laetitia, the declaration on marriage and so forth, which happened in 2016 or 2017. So they go through all these non-Catholic affirmations, which Pope Francis asserts, and these that they are heresies, and Pope Francis refused to deny them, and on the contrary, he promotes them, and therefore he has fallen into pertinacious heresy, and therefore he has fallen from office. But it needs the bishops or the cardinals to declare it so. So I have I went through their whole declaration and all the discussion around it in over, I think, 5 videos. I have the first couple of videos, my voice is kind of low, the microphone, so just turn it up all the way. Anyways, so this was not discussed with Cardinal Burke. Okay, suppose this is true. Did you hear about this letter about accusations of heresy against Francis by Aidan Nichols and others? And many professors and theologians signed it. What do you think? Is this valid? Burke would probably say it's valid because he looked into the question of whether this extra ballot meant anything, which means he has his undeclared suspicions. Anyways, this was not asked. This would have been a tremendous, this would be very, very good to have asked him. And of course, this would take effect again so this was one thing he was not asked about, this letter of accusation of heresy against Francis, which was issued in Easter 2019. I have the full 5 videos. You can watch them. I go through almost everything in it, but it ought to be read completely from the beginning to the end. And anyways, just in case this was valid and this accusations were solid, and they seem to me to be rock solid, what does Monsignor Nicola Books, who works for the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, declare? Basically, Monsignor Nicola Books says that a pope would fall from the pontificate ipso facto, by the mere fact of pertinacious heresy. And the canonist Gianfranco Giralanda, SJ, so Society of Jesus, the loss of papal office would occur ipso jure, by the law itself. This is the letter of accusations against Pope Francis for the canonical delict of heresy. 1,500 people signed it, but the actual scholars are the core, and then others signed it in support. And you can actually go to the actual open letter and read the whole letter of accusation of all the different things. So you can go through it yourself if you're interested. You can watch my video on it. And what does this termination of, first of all, actually, Nicola Books, here he says, for example, excuse me, Father Nicola, Don Nicola, are you saying that in case of heresy, just as a Christian heretic ceases to be a member of the church, does the Pope also cease to be Pope and head of the ecclesial body and lose all jurisdiction? Yes. Nicola Books says yes. Heresy affects the faith and status of a member of the church, which are the root and foundation of jurisdiction. Every believer, including the Pope, with heresy separates himself from the unity of the church. When the heresy was notorious and made public, the Pope would ipso facto lose the pontificate. And this one from Father Gianfranco Giralanda, and he is the canon law. He teaches canon law at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. And this is what he says: the vacation, so the emptying, the vacancy of the Roman see occurs in the event of a cessation from office by the Roman pontiff, which occurs in 4 reasons. 1 is death. 2, certain and perpetual madness or total mental illness. 3, notorious apostasy, heresy, schism. And 4, renunciation. So heresy, apostasy, and schism would result in loss of papal office. The Pope would no longer, in case of a heresy or schism, the Pope would no longer have any power, because ipso jure would lapse from the primatial office. This is the case admitted in doctrine of the notorious apostasy, heresy, and schism, in which the Roman pontiff could fall, but as a private doctor. And of course, then he goes through the possibility. How is this affected and declared? Basically, you have to at least have some Roman cardinals declare the fact of the loss of papal office. Not that they're deposing the Pope. They're just saying, well, basically he deposed himself. He cut off himself because of notorious heresy. And that would be declaring the see vacant. So this is basically what the interview with Cardinal Burke went through. So it's, again, he did not condemn. He understands all the confusion, what's going on. Is the Pope Benedict really resigned? Did he not really resign? Is he sharing the Petrine ministry? Is he did the violations happen in the conclave with Francis? Did Francis fall from the office through heresy? Is the letter of resignation valid because of the errors in the Latin? What's going on? And he doesn't condemn anybody. He just says, he basically, even Antonio Socci, he considers him a very outstanding man and even a saintly man. A man who believes Benedict himself is still the Pope. And he is, according to Cardinal Burke, a saintly man. As you can tell, it's a very confusing situation. So what are we supposed to do? Hold on to what is the one and only Catholic and Apostolic faith that has always been taught in the catechisms and the councils of the Church. I have to hold in high esteem both Benedict, definitely, but again, did he run from the wolves as he's claimed not to? He said God gave him the strength not to run from the wolves in 2005, but to me it seems he hid maybe from the wolves, not completely. And Francis, we listen to all that he says, which is good. Anything he tries to tell us to do, which is contrary to the faith or contrary to the doctrine of the Church, we simply refuse. And that's it. Go to Mass every Sunday, every day if possible. Pray, do our prayers, sacrifices, and eventually Francis will die, Benedict will die, and we will have another Pope. Hopefully one Pope. And hopefully it is Cardinal Robert Serra, the Lion of Africa. And he is, I'll have a review on his book, God Alone. And it is like this, he speaks like a true prophet, like a man of God. Like you would think a Pope, a man of God who is fully infused with the divine, would speak. I love this man. Anyway, so this is it. I will place a couple links for you to go over it. But we cannot go anywhere. There's only one Church of Christ, one Bride of Christ, which is the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. There is the Orthodox have their own deviations in faith, including divorce, contraception, even married priesthood. This is an innovation. Early Church, the priests were married, but they lived continent celibate lives after ordination to the priesthood. This is documented. The discipline was loosened over time, but so only the Latin Church maintained the apostolic discipline. That's it. So keep the faith. Go to the traditional liturgy, because the traditional liturgy, the traditional Roman Rite, or any of the traditional Eastern rites, or even Western rites, a Dominican, traditional Carmelite, because the traditional rites convey the faith. They pass it on, and the ethos, the feeling, the atmosphere of holiness pervades the church, and that pervades the people, and that pervades your soul and lifts it up to God. All right, that's it. That's all for this video. Please do like the video if you like it, and do subscribe to the channel. I'll try to do my best. Again, I'm not giving any dogmatic anything, because if Cardinal Burke is not willing to give a dogmatic answer to something, I'm not going to give a dogmatic answer to anything. I will just present the facts and do what I always do. Go to the Mass, do my prayers, and always remain a true Christian, a Catholic, because only a Catholic keeps the undefiled, undiluted, apostolic Christian faith whole and entire. See you next time.